Hello, good morning, and welcome to our AMA for managing Windows in the public sector. My name is Sarah. I am the public sector community manager for Microsoft. And here with me on camera is Roy Barton, Pat Fetty, and Ken Gosens. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves and their role and what questions they're excited to answer today, or what kinds of questions.
Hey, thanks everybody. My name is Roy Barton. I'm a security specialist in the federal government focusing on endpoint management, everything that's covered under your EMS license SKUs to include InTune and the co-management of your Windows devices with Configuration Manager. Excited to answer any questions today about Windows Update for Business policies, keeping Windows current, and Windows 365.
And my name is Ken Goosens. I'm a senior product manager in the Cloud Managed Services Customer Acceleration team. On a daily basis, I help customers accelerating with Windows Autopatch and with Windows 11 adoption and deployments. You can ask me anything about Windows updates, policies, Windows configuration, and obviously the Windows 11 adoption planning.
And I'm Pat Fetty. I'm part of the InTune product group in our customer acceleration team. So my role is to help large customers get onto InTune as quickly as possible. And I'm also 100% dedicated to public sector and gov. So I don't work with commercial customers. I work strictly with government customers. So comfortable with any kind of InTune related questions. That's really kind of my wheelhouse. And looking forward to a conversation today.
All right, and to kick us off, we have a question from Rick. In order to allow guest users in our GCC High tenant, each guest must have a sponsor from our internal users. I created a custom security attribute called sponsor. I can manually assign and populate that attribute for a guest using the AAD admin portal. Second part, that's longer, but these questions tend to be nuanced. We have around 1,000 guest users, so maintaining and reporting on this attribute manually is just not practical. I wouldn't think so either. I don't see a way in the interface to query on the sponsor attribute, and I don't know how to populate or query on the attribute from PowerShell. I've looked at Graph Explorer, but it does not seem to work correctly in GCC High. Any suggestions are welcome. If anyone has the PowerShell code to do this, that would be great. All right.
I can take that one, I think.
All right.
So in Azure Active Directory, there is a way to create custom user attributes. So please check there your Azure Active Directory to create that attribute. And then you can probably use the Azure Active Directory PowerShell module to manage users and their attributes. To update the customer or the custom attribute for a user, you can use the set Azure AD user extension commandlet. For example, if the attribute name is sponsor and the attribute value is then Rick Angel or Angel, the command will look like set Azure AD user extension. You need your object ID, the extension name, and then the extension value. And that will probably return or set that value for you.
Awesome. Do you see this issue often, Ken, or do you feel like a lot of people don't know about like this answer that you just gave, or these services and functions essentially that you can put into PowerShell?
I think it's more about knowing where to look and what to do and what to set. So we have it in our docs. We have there a doc page how to basically configure those custom user attributes and how then to query them with PowerShell.
Gotcha.
It's
I know that sometimes.
common,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Sarah. It's a pretty common thing across the federal space, especially with external identities. Our customers a lot of times want to know how they can populate those, and Ken wrote some instructions up real quick, and I tested them out, and they work. So it is completely doable.
You're actually starting to answer my next question, Roy, which it's like our minds are melding. But yeah, oftentimes people will see these walkthroughs or these instructions within like the documentation that Microsoft has, and unless there's a specific call out or people have talked about testing them within like the GCC High environments, oftentimes we find that our audience they're not sure whether or not it will even work within GCC High. So in this, my follow-up question to that, for this follow-up documentation that you're talking about that you've written, does it call out GCC High specifically, or is it just a general for anybody to use?
So I'll take that, and I'll be completely transparent. Pat and his team are doing a lot of work to keep, especially the InTune service description docs, up to date with the differences between the instantiations of our sovereign clouds in the US. A lot of times the documentation doesn't call it out. But
Gotcha.
one of the things that I have seen for sure is when it comes to Azure Active Directory itself, the underlying service, there is a lot of compatibility across all of those clouds. Right. So typically, if a commandlet works in one cloud, it's going to work in another, at
Gotcha.
least as far as Azure Active Directory is concerned.
But I'd add one small caveat that the graph endpoints are different in our gov cloud than they are in the public cloud. So where you'd see a script that says graph.microsoft.com, for our gov cloud, it's graph.microsoft.us. So I have made that mistake countless times. So as you're writing your script, make sure you're hitting the right graph endpoints. They're all documented, whether you're going to IL4 GCC High or IL5 DoD, because the graph endpoints are even different in those environments. So graph.microsoft.us and graph.microsoft.dod.
And I've seen that before too, where obviously because of the different clouds, there's sometimes like different endpoints you need to use. And it's definitely something you need to navigate. I know even when I started this job, oftentimes I kind of felt like I was in the labyrinth, for lack of a better term, and David Bowie wasn't there to like help me, or any of those other Muppet characters, for example. I guess no, David Bowie didn't help her; he made her get lost more. So I guess the hoggle guy. But yeah, like that's one of the reasons why I think it is important to have some of these call outs. And actually, it's giving me an idea to have possibly a follow-up blog on this. I'm looking at you, Roy. Actually, all of you. So then that way we can bring attention to this. And that's why these AMAs are awesome, so that we can call this out or see what questions are happening out there. We do have another question from Twitter. How do I stay updated when cloud services are added or updated in Intune Microsoft 365?
Admin.microsoft.com. We publish everything and all of the changes coming to the tenants in the admin console. So that's going to be down under, and I don't have it open in front of me, but it's going to be in your admin console. You can also set up notification alerts for administrators in your Azure tenant. So as those come out, you will actually receive an email.
Oh, that's cool. How much can you customize those notifications? I've just always been curious, like, can you make something pop up on your computer, or like, how else can you call your attention to it? I've noticed email has lately just become kind of an ocean for people. So what other things can be done to help with those notifications?
I'd have to check. I know there was somebody that wrote they wrote something to go pull all of that data and display it as a dashboard. Pat, I don't know if you've seen that or not, but there was something floating around a while back. But currently, the supported method in the console is just sending an email for that notification.
Yeah, and I'll also add, related to that question, there is the M365 roadmap tool. Which unfortunately Intune is the one service that's a glaring miss there, but we're working on that. So we have two docs, what's new in Intune and what's in development in Intune. And so on the M365 tool, you can go select drop downs that say, I want to see Azure AD in development for Gov Cloud.
Right.
Intune will get there eventually, but that tells you not only what was just released recently, but what we're working on and a time frame for that to be released. I have them both bookmarked and reference them all the time.
Yeah, I have the same setup where I think mine, I just do the drop down of, I just select all of the Gov clouds, just so then that way you can see kind of what's coming out, what's out GA, and then like the predicted dates for everything that's kind of upcoming for those environments. We have another question. Are there special considerations for setting up a CMG for Gov clouds?
I can take that one. The only difference between so CMG is Cloud Management Gateway. For those that aren't aware, it's a capability as part of System Center Configuration Manager that allows you to start setting up co-management. The only real difference between setting up in a Gov Cloud versus commercial cloud is that I think it's the first or second screen on the wizard. It will ask you what environment you're in, and so You need to select the Gov environment and then obviously log in with your Gov admin credentials. But the rest of the CMG setup is exactly the same across the 2 different clouds.
And Pat, there's 2 options, right? Public and then government. So
yeah, I don't remember exactly what the string says, but it's something like that. Yeah.
Any of our GCC customers need to understand that they're still choosing the public cloud, not the government cloud. If you're GCC High or DoD, you need to pick the government cloud.
Correct. Yep.
Gotcha. And we're still waiting for questions to come in here. So what is something that you feel like, while we're waiting for some to come in, that you feel like people often miss in Windows for Gov? Like, what's something that you feel like a lot of customers and partners aren't utilizing that's there or don't know that's there?
Good question. There are some technologies that are more government scenarios will be shipped. A good one that what we call laps, or which back in the old Active Directory days, you had something like this that will basically on a rotating schedule take the local admin password and basically change it for you for security reasons. That literally just shipped, I want to say about a month ago across all clouds. But that lapse scenario is definitely a big one in Gov. And again, like I said, it took us a while to build the cloud version of that. But that's, again, it's more of a Gov scenario, but can be used across any cloud. So, financial service customers or any others that are very security conscious would certainly want to roll out and deploy LAPS. Local admin password solution. Local admin password solution. Sorry.
And then how is the admin made aware of this new password that's being used, or is there anywhere that they can go and fetch that information?
Well, I believe we'll echo that back to them in their console.
Okay.
So yeah, there's tooling that around says, how complex do you want it? How often do you want it changed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because there are still scenarios, unfortunately, where you have to have a local admin on the box, like for legacy software reasons. So running as a standard user, that's absolutely a Gov scenario. Very few Gov customers I work with allow their folks to run as local admin. So it's got a bunch of great options to it. And again, like I said, it was something that was there in Active Directory forever. It just took us a while to build the cloud version, but people love it.
Awesome. Next question we have, can I use the same InTune policies for my cloud PC that I use for laptops and desktops?
Short answer is yes. As I'm sure the person who asked the question noticed, we don't have like an export button in the InTune console, but we have lots and lots of PowerShell samples out on GitHub. So another good page to mark is go into Bing, search InTune GitHub samples. Again, these are sample scripts, as they're not 100% officially supported, but exporting the policy via PowerShell and then importing. You can even do that across clouds. So you can export your Gov cloud policies and then import them into a commercial cloud if you want. I've got a lot of customers that have a foot in both worlds. And so that's exactly how they do it, is that they'll create the policies in one tenant, test them out, everything looks good, great, export them, and then import them into the other tenant.
And speaking of, sorry, go ahead, Roy.
I was just going to say, with your cloud PC, so let's clarify that term if you don't know. That's a Windows 365 device, right? For those that are out there that don't know. Absolutely, because your cloud PC is nothing more than a physical device just hosted in the cloud. So any of the policies that you're using for Windows Update, for compliance, for configuration profiles, they'll all work on those cloud PCs. Absolutely.
All right, and our next one we have, does Windows 365 have controls for pass-through, redirection, and screen scraping?
I'll give that one to you, Roy.
Or Ken? Not familiar? I got it, but I just want to give everybody a fair chance. So absolutely, a lot of those are controlled with the configuration profiles that we would apply to the device. So, and then the use of the web browser or the RDP app or the Windows 365 app, we can apply MAM policies to those to set up protection. So you can't do screen grabs from the application. You can't connect printers, or if you need to do something like just a PIV card redirection or something like that, those policies are there and can be configured per the application that you're using, most definitely.
And this is available in GCC High environments, or are the environments limited, or all of them?
It's available across the board.
Gotcha. All right. And next question from our last AMA on Store app management. Is Microsoft Store ready to be used for app management in the government environment for government governance and other policies that are required in government environments?
I'll take that one. I got to tiptoe around this a little bit because there's some NDA things in here. Eventually, yes. So we have a new Windows app management story on the commercial cloud that shipped a few months ago. That same experience we are working on to build into the Gov Cloud as well. And it's a lot more than just a store type of experience. There'll be things like a lot of stuff's based on Winget, so you could do custom repositories and things like that. Don't have a public time frame to share, unfortunately, but it is certainly high on the priority list. At least today, in InTune, managing Windows apps is, let's say, less than a stellar experience. But that's something we're absolutely working on. Again, don't have a time frame, but it's high on the priority list.
So actually, to expand upon that, could you talk a little bit about oftentimes, I know that there's frustration around, things not coming out for like the government side versus commercial. Can you talk a little bit about like the extra obstacles? I'll just say obstacles in place, or safeguards in place for the government side versus commercial side, as it relates to this instance and others as well. Just like because I know Rima Reyes, for example, has talked about it. There's more hurdles to go over. So for Microsoft Store app management and government, like what are the extra hurdles that we do need to go over when we're considering this, or that we're doing now versus commercial?
Yeah, I could take up the rest of this call topic. But in a nutshell, the easiest thing is that per our customers' requirements, things need to be isolated within the Gov Cloud. So for things like the store, as an example, there's a reliance on other Windows services to make the scenario work. And though the instances of those services may not live in Gov Cloud. So the way we've been approaching this in the past is that you have two options. Number one is either re-architect your Intune solution / feature to remove those dependencies, or go talk to that team, convince them to take on the work to build a new instance of that service within the Gov Cloud. And that's not an easy task, nor is it a cheap task. It's a lot of expensive engineering time, man hours, et cetera, et cetera. We are looking at a potential third option that I can't really discuss here, but that in a nutshell, for any feature that you see that's shipped in commercial that isn't in Gov, I'd say 99% of the time that's it. There's a reliance on a commercial service that goes outside the Gov Cloud boundary, and so that's where let's just say customers get uncomfortable if that's the case. So, but the thing is, there are other instances of that where your Gov tenant is still talking to commercial services, right? iOS devices, if you manage iOS devices in Intune, they all basically phone home to Apple, during the whole process of delivering policies and so forth to say, okay, is this device still trusted? So you're still, in that case, you're sending data outside the Gov boundary to Apple. Same thing with Google. So if you're managing Android devices as well. So we're looking at this and saying, okay, well, can we take the same model here and apply it to Windows services? And so that's something we're like discussing right now. And I believe I've got a meeting later this afternoon to talk about this. But yeah, that's typically it. You got a dependent service that doesn't exist in GovCloud or within that boundary. And again, so we have the two options. We are investigating a third option because it's, like I said, it's really expensive to take an instance of a service and then build it, test it, and do all that fun stuff that you got to do if you're going to push it over to the GovCloud. So
yeah, so essentially same schoolyard, different playgrounds. Yes, I like making metaphors.
I know. I was just going to say I love that, and I'm totally stealing that.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. So, like, even if there's a slide over here, that's cool, but you're in a different playground in a different sandbox. So you've got to get a new one built. And I think a lot of times people don't consider that, or they think it's all just one big thing versus there's data sovereignty concerns. So you have to have those separate playgrounds.
Yep.
And maybe DoD has another playground surrounded by a fence and a moat or something like that. If we're going to keep going on this metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. We're still evaluating the right time and approach to moving from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Some of our estate is on Windows 10 LTSC. Will there be an LTSC for Windows 11? What's the deployment workflow for LTSC devices and non-LTSC devices?
I can take that one if you want. So end of April, I think we released a blog post where we announced Windows 11 LTSC. I believe that we will make it available the second half of 2024. So that is definitely something that is on the roadmap. Obviously, knowing also, or it's important to understand that Windows 10 is in the latest version, the 22H2. We will continue to monthly send security patches until October 2025. Now, when it comes to starting to look into deployment planning, it's really important to understand your current environment, your current Windows 10 estate, the applications running on the Windows 10, the version of Windows 10, the different versions of Windows that you have, and then start planning ahead towards successful enrollment of Windows 11. I don't know if there is anybody in the call here that would like to add something. In
Yes.
terms of readiness, for example, readiness assessment that need to be conducted in terms of application compatibility and probably many more.
Especially since in the last 2 months, I've probably had 5 conversations with separate federal customers that are running. Y'all, I've got a dog here that's suffering from allergies, so I apologize if you're scratching. But I've got a customer or multiple customers that have come to me and said that they're running LTSC, but they're doing it on standard Office IT workstations, just regular laptops or workstations. And my first question is always why? Why are you running LTSC on?
I think you cut out a bit.
Uh-oh, am I back?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yep. So why are you running LTSC on a regular Office IT workstation? LTSC has specific use cases. Long-term servicing channel means that you're going to put this operating system on a piece of hardware that isn't expected to change over time, isn't going to be upgraded over time. So it's for things like door badge readers or for tanks out in the battlefield or for ATM machines that are just going to sit there and run day in and day out, right? That's what LTSC was designed for. The thing that I want to caution customers about is if you're using Office on a Windows device and you're installing LTSC, there are supportability issues there. And there's clearly documented, we have it clearly documented what is supported and what is not. Looks like we lost Sarah, so it's going to be us for just a few minutes.
Oh, sorry.
All good.
A little bit.
But yeah, number 2, it's super important, and Pat, maybe you can hang on to this a little bit, especially in the GCC space. It's super important that you start your co-management journey And or if you're managing with Intune, you enable Endpoint Analytics so you can get that upgrade readiness report out of the Intune console, right? We're going to give you the data you need for the devices to know if they're ready to upgrade. And that's going to cross applications, that's going to cross third-party ISV antiviruses, that's going to cross hardware, any hardware compatibility issues. So we give you a really good built-in report on what is ready in your environment and what is not.
Yeah, Endpoint Analytics is certainly a great option there. Unfortunately, as we sit here today, it's not quite yet supported in GovCloud. That one is coming soon. I could certainly say that. But I'll give you another option. As a workaround, if you will, I had a very large customer use their hardware reporting from Config Manager, from SCCM. And so that, at least from a hardware perspective, will basically flag or at least give you the data you need that Endpoint Analytics will eventually give you when we ship it in GovCloud. But you'll see things like, whether it's got a TPM chip or not, or, obviously, BIOS versions and all that good stuff. So if you're a ConfigMan customer today, you can also use that hardware report as a source of data to understand, at least on a percentage-wise, what percentage of your environment is ready to, from a hardware perspective, ready to move to Windows 11. But as I said, Endpoint Analytics is coming to Intune soon.
Right. And did we already ask the OS
Ken, you're on mute.
upgrades?
Oh, Ken was talking.
Yeah, sorry. I when we look at the applications, is test-based something that that is supported in a GCC environment?
So all of that reporting in our GovClouds is available to GCC. Now understand that there's a boundary there where we go into GCC High and DoD where they're not available yet.
Okay.
And our next question, just in case like this was already asked, OS upgrades always call unexpected issues. Are there any major policies differences in Windows 11 I should be aware of?
What types of policies are we referring to here?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The question does not elaborate. Any major policies differences, OS upgrade. I'm not really sure what unexpected issues is being referred to, or do any of you see any types of unexpected issues with OS upgrades?
I mean, me and Pat both, even before one of our very large customers in the DoD moved to mostly Intune management, we did OS upgrades with configuration manager and feature updates that, we didn't cause many issues at all. And if there were issues, typically it was with third-party applications such as an antivirus application or something like that that would block the upgrade. But very rarely is it even in enterprises with over 500,000 devices do we see a large pocket of breakages or issues with upgrades.
How do we compare policies in Windows 10 to Windows 11 or feature update to feature update?
I would think that's more of a feature to feature type thing than it would be necessarily policies. For me, when you look at our new security policies that come out, and when you look at the settings catalog in Intune, they're applicable to both Windows 10 and Windows 11. Under the hood, Windows 11 shares nearly the same kernel build as Windows 10 does. If you apply a policy that isn't applicable to Windows 11, it's just not going to apply. Now, if you're talking about group policies, there may be some extra processing that's involved on those devices while it sifts through to find out if that reg key or if that policy is there. But when you're applying CSPs through Intune configuration profiles, it's just not going to apply because the setting doesn't exist.
Gotcha. Next question, our cloud doesn't support update compliance or endpoint analytics. How can we capture the data we need?
Ken, I think that was kind of, no, I'm sorry, not Ken, Pat, I think that was you talking about using hardware inventories and maybe extending the hardware inventory to look for certain things. I know we have a couple of Gov customers that do that with Configuration Manager.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Endpoint Analytics is coming to GovCloud soon. It's going to give you just these beautiful reports with all the data that you need. But as Roy alluded to, we had a large DoD customer. Since we haven't shipped Endpoint Analytics in GovCloud yet. They were using their ConfigMan hardware reports just to understand hardware readiness for the upgrades. So that's a very viable workaround because it'll give you all the data you need. For applications, though, I don't think it gives you any sort of information that says this app, runs on Windows 10 but won't run on Windows 11. So that's a potential gap there as well. But like I said, Endpoint Analytics is coming soon, so you won't have to fiddle with these workaround kind of things. But like I said, this is a big DoD customer that's got over 500,000 machines that are being co-managed. So they figured it out, and just using the reports they have today.
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that we did while I was there, Pat, was we wrote a compliance baseline and deployed it with Configuration Manager with a list of known knowns. And that compliance baseline looked for certain versions of applications that were known not to be compatible with the next build of Windows. If that was the case, we would use that CI to move those devices into a collection so they could be remediated. So that was another workaround. It's a little more work to write the PowerShell scripting out, but if you have a list of known knowns, you can definitely do it on-prem with Configuration Manager.
And also, speaking of PowerShell, where would be some of the better places for people to go to get some of these commands to use? I know that one of you, I believe, referred to like GitHub. Are there any official or unofficial sources? And also expanding on that, what are ways that you recommend testing it out? I know, like when I was first getting into PowerShell, I worked for a company that did email migrations. It was a lot of trial and error, and you didn't want to do a trial and error in somebody else's tenant.
Yeah, the tricky part there is today we don't have a good way to provide GovCloud customers with a test tenant. Anybody on the commercial side, they can just go through the standard EMS trial page, throw down your credit card, and get a bunch of licenses. So it's really easy on the commercial side. Unfortunately, we don't have the same ability, let's just say, to do this in the GovCloud. It's actually one of the things I'm on a V team on that we're trying to work with that and solve that problem, at least to make it easier for people that buy Gov SKUs. Ideally, what would happen is that you purchase the Gov SKU, and then the commerce system would ask you, hey, would you like a test tenant as well? You say, yes, well, and then you'd be able to transfer licenses between the two. So, because everybody still has that whole test lab mentality, even in the cloud, right? So yep. Test tenant, prod tenant, super common across Gov customers for sure. It's just unfortunately that we don't make the process very easy for Gov customers. Actually, they would have to do a separate small license purchase to get that second tenant. So it's not terribly, tragic, but it's just more difficult than it is on the commercial side, which tends to be a bit of a trend in the Gov space.
Yeah, because like we talked about, it's a more nuanced setup, I guess, for different, Gov clouds, depending on like the environment and what you want to do. So sometimes I could imagine that test tenant would be a bit more difficult to set up. It's a more intricate playground, to go off our metaphor there. Our next question is, what are our options for enforcing security updates to maintain compliance? That's a big one, especially with some of the updates and reiterations of CMMC that's coming out. Or even, some of the trust policies, like my shirt from Cooey, zero trusts given, and how to enforce that. So what are options that we have to enforce that currently, and what's coming?
I love this question because we did some really cool things with a DoD customer when they were testing our GCC High tenant out. And when it comes to compliance, first off, the easiest way to keep Windows current is through the use of in our clouds, Windows Update for Business policies, because auto patch is not available. For Ken, where he's at, it's a little bit different because auto patch is available. But number two, in your compliance policies, you can set minimal OS version values all the way down to the build number, right? This is where we get into zero trust and we start talking about, okay, 7 days post patch deployment, a user has poor behavior in closing their laptop, they let it go to sleep, they shut it down, it doesn't receive the patch, or it doesn't update within the time frame that we set in those Windows Update for Business policies. When we tie a compliance policy to that with that build number of windows that we're supposed to be updating to, and layer on a conditional access policy with that, we can block access to all M365 services until that user corrects their behavior and they allow that device to update.
Awesome. And then the follow-up to that we have, does the expedite compatibility in Intune work with government clouds?
I think that's is it compatibility or capability? Capability.
Or sorry, capability.
Yeah.
Coffee needs to kick in still, but yeah, there we go.
That's a Pat question.
Yeah, sorry, not yet. It's, again, I don't have a public date to share, but it's in the queue, it's funded, it's coming. That's all I can tell you. That was a terrible answer, but
well, you're saying that you're working on it. It's not like that's a cute question. Move along. You're actively taking that and you're working on it. I don't think I've heard anybody in an interview do that, but it's good to acknowledge that. And is there a URL that those that are in GovClouds can go to give feedback, or what's a good way to give feedback specifically on these GovCloud instances or questions for Gov in regards to like Windows and Intune?
I'll take the Intune piece of that. So we used user voice for a number of years as the kind of public feedback mechanism, but I don't think that's been replaced with anything else. So right now, you've got the generic feedback form, so you see the URL there. Typically, since we, at least in my role, work with larger customers, they have an account team and they've got a technical account manager and all that. So a lot of that data feeds in through them. And then one of the things we're also working on right now is when people in the field at Microsoft, let's look at feature requests, right? Customer needs to build, customer needs an XYZ widget. Their account team will take that feedback, put it into a tool that is not connected to our internal engineering tools, but we are working on building that connection. And more importantly, I've got an active customer right now that this is their challenge is they say, we'd like to get this feature built in Intune, goes into the system, but they have no way of seeing like, hey, are we making progress on this? Is it gonna happen? Is it being funded? So that two-way communication channel between the two tools, we just put together a team of folks to actually go solve that problem. And that's something that's just been painfully missing for a long time. It's not, and again, that's really more for the feature request type of thing, so that customers will be able to track via a public URL what the status of their feature request is. I mean, that's been missing for decades.
Now,
But
Pat, on that, is the technical adoption program still active and available for customers to consume if they meet the criteria?
For Windows, you mean?
For Configuration Manager or
yes, there's still a config man tab for sure. And it's very active too. So
good.
But yeah, the generic Intune feedback URL there. You can also submit feedback via your tenant. So there's more than one option, but I'm trying to convey that it's not just going into a black box. Actually, we do take that feedback very seriously. It's why we have people like my role and so forth that can sort of bridge the worlds of working with a customer and then bringing stuff back into engineering to continue to build a better mousetrap. So there are ways to do it. Like I said, larger customers having a Microsoft account team, and a lot of folks, at least for Intune things, since I'm our dedicated Gov guy, they just come to me and say, Pat, are we building this or are we not building this? And so I field a lot of those types of questions every week too.
And you're saying that like you're building a system at least to like, I mean, I remember using user voice back in the day for another tech company I worked for, where it was like you put in feedback, whatever, and it would like tell you like, I think ours at the time was like in progress or like, you know, being worked on, that type of thing. And that's good to have versus like, because, you know, you're a great resource, but and I've been victim to this as well too. Like it sucks to be a single point of failure. You know, you don't want to think like I can't go on vacation because I'm the only person to ask to give answers. You want something that's a little bit more efficient. And that's great to hear that we're working towards that and that it's not just going into like a black box or we're just like, yeah, we're taking your feedback. And then that's it. That's all they hear. And it either appears or it doesn't. Our next follow-up question we have is, or not follow-up, just question. How can I target app policies so that one policy gets applied to apps on one OS version, a different policy gets applied to apps on a later OS version to ensure each device has the latest security updates?
Ken, you've been quiet. Can you take that one?
I would say dynamic groups in Azure Active Directory, and then you create specific policies and target those to those different groups that you have in Azure Active Directory containing that specific devices or set of devices.
Gotcha. So you can apply just depending on the version.
The version of the operating system, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. And then for a how-to, is there, I'm guessing there is, but is there documentation available on how to do this specifically?
Yes.
I will have a look.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Oftentimes I find with some of these, like there is documentation, but you kind of need to piece it together versus just if you have this situation, here is how you do it. Our next question from Stanley, is there a centralized method for managing PWA apps on local devices?
What's a PWA app?
Thank you. I was just going to
Privileged workstation.
Your guess is as good as mine. Oh, wait, sorry. What was that, Ken?
I think it's PAW, maybe Privileged Access Workstation.
Okay. Progressive Web App.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Heather.
can you repeat the question again, Sarah?
Oh, sure. Is there a centralized method for managing PWA apps, so progressive web apps, on local devices?
What's a local device? I'm not sure. I don't know what the definition of local device is. A device is a device. It's either managed or not. So
yeah. Let me see here.
I would say take your best guess at it. We can see if we get like a follow-up to it later. So I guess for just devices, how would you do that?
Well, here in what Heather's telling us, it's like any other app that can be compiled and deployed. So if you either put the Intune wrapper around it, or however you deploy it through ConfigMan or the Intune wrapper through Intune, you would manage it like you would any other application. If the, reading this is correct. You would just, as you update, recompile your app, you would have to upload a new version and then deploy it out to replace the old version.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was a new one to me, but then I guess you guys are used to, well, myself included, with Gov IT stuff, we're kind of acronymed to death over here. So
I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but I want to write that down.
it's not like Microsoft isn't guilty of acronym soup either.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. I think we all are. At this point, I feel like people could tell me like they could make up an acronym and I would just assume it's canon until somebody told me otherwise. Our next coming question, does conditional access work in Gov Clouds, and are there any special considerations?
It absolutely does. it is being widely used across government customers. There are no there are no big differences. The one kind of missing piece for Gov is we ship something like a concept of creating custom compliance policies. So stuff that may not be in the console, that's not hit GovCloud yet. Again, in the queue, funded work we know we're going to do. Don't have a time frame for it, but conditional access, not only is it something very unique to InTune, but it's a very powerful tool for those that aren't really familiar with the concept, right? The concept is create an InTune policy that says if your device does not meet XYZ criteria, so like if you're not on this build number or this build version, or if your device is not BitLocker encrypted, or, you know, so you got a handful of options there. If you don't meet those conditions, right, then we can cut off access to your corporate email until you meet these conditions, right? That's a very simple example of conditional access, and conditional access works on more than just email, right? You can block, access to SharePoint sites. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do, but again, it's a very, very powerful tool that almost every Gov customer I've worked with they're using it today.
And since we only have 4 minutes to go, I'm just going to ask everybody to give their best tip for IT pros wrangling Windows devices in the public sector. What is your best tip or best practice? And we can start with Ken.
Well, there's a big difference between the US Gov customers and the EMEA customers, obviously, because in EMEA, they are using just like the commercial Azure tenants, so it's slightly different. Best practices here is good preparation, good analysis of current applications, and making sure that they have a good plan to move forward with their Windows deployments, to keep Windows current as well. Obviously, we see a lot of customers here using Windows Autopatch that helps them to do that in an automated fashion, so they stay current all the time. And yeah, move to the cloud. I would say enable co-management. Don't be afraid. Start moving your devices into a cloud to be more modern, more secured, and have a better productivity and flexibility for your end users.
Awesome. And we can move on to Pat next.
Yeah, I'll add to what Ken just said about, yes, moving to be cloud managed is going to be it's going to be a lot less headaches for you in the future, for sure. I will also say that because Ken just alluded to this too about being hybrid Azure Active Directory join versus what we call full cloud, meaning that you're just Azure Active Directory is your authentication solution. Internally, we are trying to, let's just say, entice customers to not go down the hybrid identity path. There are certain scenarios today that don't support hybrid identity. It's a legacy concept, right? Because it still involves good old-fashioned Active Directory on-prem. And I can tell you that as we look at building new capabilities in InTune, one of the first questions we ask ourselves is, do we want to support hybrid? It's when you're engineering for two different, very different scenarios like this, it's double the work with not quite the same level of benefit. So, and we've made it, we've created co-management. For those of you that aren't aware, co-management is where your device can be managed by ConfigMan and managed by InTune. And the migration from going to on-prem to full cloud management, that's what co-management was designed for. We used to be called a bridge technology, where instead of just diving into the pool of cloud-only management, you can set up co-management, set up the CMG, and essentially do it on a workload by workload basis. So I highly recommend people go investigate co-management as an option to move into the cloud. But going native cloud join as just in Azure Active Directory, you're going to have a better experience, and you will be guaranteed to get all the new bells and whistles that we build, because some of the new bells and whistles may not support hybrid join.
Yep. And real quick, as Pat alluded to, modern auth. If you can test CBA and prove that out, use CBA, co-management, and Windows Update for Business policies. You don't know how much it's going to make your life so much easier. And don't use LTSC unless you absolutely have to. That's what I got.
And
Right.
CBA is cert based off what Roy just mentioned.
And also, so we are coming to a close. I do want to thank those that are active in the community chat, answering questions that aren't on camera: Bev, Nyler, Joe, Kevin, and Rochelle. And it sounds like we've got a lot of like really good questions here, a lot of really good answers, many of which I think we should make follow-up blogs on for the public sector blog. Thank you everybody for coming in, and thank you for your questions. This has been really great. I always love seeing like how involved some of these questions can be, and just the interesting answers we get, and even just the nuance. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And next up is Tech Community Live for supporting accessibility with Windows 11, and that is at aka.ms/AMA/Windows 11 accessibility. We hope to see you there next, and we will see you next time.
See y'all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.